Well, good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony, which today commemorates the 75th anniversary of the Second Battle of El Alamein. My name's Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is leading aircraftswoman Jennifer Bleasdale. We're honoured to welcome veterans of the Battle of El Alamein who are joining us today, as well as those who are here to remember their family and friends who were involved in this action. We are especially honoured to acknowledge His Excellency, Mr. Mohammed Harat Mahmoud Harat, Egyptian Ambassador to Australia, the Honourable Dan Tehan, Minister for Veterans Affairs, the Honourable Dr. Mike Kelly, representing the Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs, Lieutenant General Angus Campbell, Chief of Army, representing the Chief of Defence Force, Commodore Simon Ottaviano, representing the Chief of Navy, Air Vice Marshal Gavin Turnbull, representing Chief of Air Force, Warrant Officer Class 1 Don Spinks, Regimental Sergeant Major, Australian Army, Mr. J.J. Harrison, representing the National President of the Naval Association of Australia, Mr. John King, President, ACT Branch, Returned and Services League of Australia, Wing Commander Lance Halverson, National Vic President, RAAF Association, Ms. Pat McCabe, National President, TPI Association of Australia, and Mr. Robert Connor, Board Director, Legacy, and the contingent from the Department of Veterans Affairs. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family, visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From New South Wales, Lake Manoora Public School, and from South Australia, Port Elliot Primary School. Australia's Federation Guard is a tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. If you're able, I invite you all to please stand and join in singing the national anthem. I would now like to invite Dr. Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, to deliver an address.
Please be seated, students and veterans. Australians, all let us rejoice, for we are young and free. The first line of our national anthem. We just sang it. We sing it often and we hear it sung often, but far less often do we pause to reflect on what it really means. Cloaking us here on these bronze panels are the names of 102,800 Australian men and women who have given their lives for us and our freedoms. And I say in particular to the young people that are on my left, look into the faces of the men that are sitting opposite you. They too, like you, were once young. But more than any other group of Australians, they gave their youth and their mates gave their lives for us and our freedoms. Every time you sing that national anthem, for the rest of your life, think of them, because it is they that have allowed us to be free. Today we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Second Battle of El Alamein, in what was Australia's most important year after 1788. Named after an otherwise unremarkable railway stop in Egypt's Western Desert, the Second Battle of El Alamein was the watershed of the Western Desert Campaign. By early July 1942, German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's Panzer Army Africa had advanced to within 100 kilometres of Alexandria, dangerously close to the ports and cities of Egypt, the base facilities of the Commonwealth forces, the Suez Canal, and routes to the Middle Eastern and Persian oil fields. The First Battle of El Alamein saw the 8th Army, which included British, New Zealand, South African, Indian and Australian troops, operating from its new defensive position near the tiny railway stop of El Alamein. When the fighting died down at the end of the month, the 8th Army had suffered severe losses, but had stopped Rommel's drive into Egypt. It also now held the important high ground near the coast, an excellent position from which to launch further offensives. The 8th Army grew in strength with the arrival of more troops and equipment strangling Axis supply lines. On the night of the 23rd of October, 1942, 75 years ago today, a massive artillery barrage heralded the Allied offensive. The infantry successfully captured most of their objectives, but Major General Montgomery, worried that his offensive was becoming bogged down, and ordered the Australians of the 9th Division to switch their attack northward. A week of extremely fierce fighting followed, with Australian troops grinding forward over well-defended enemy positions. As happened in the First Battle of El Alamein, their gains so worried Rommel that he diverted his strongest units to stop them. With Rommel's attention firmly on the Australians in the north, his line weakened further south, and on the 2nd of November, British tanks struck a decisive blow. Rommel was forced to withdraw, and his army began a headlong retreat, eventually being ejected from Africa altogether. Between July and November 1942, the Australian 9th Division suffered almost 6,000 dead, wounded and missing. Although comprising 10% of Allied troops, the Australians accounted for 22% of its casualties. Percy Gratwick and Bill Kibbe were awarded the Victoria Cross. Names like Trig 29, the Blockhouse, the Saucer, and Thompson's Post took on an aura akin to Polygon Wood or Bull Corps a generation earlier. Australian sacrifice here was as dense as anywhere else in the terrible year of 1942. Of Trig 29, where Gratwick earned his VC, an Australian signaller wrote, "Trig 29, the worst spot I have been anywhere in this war." He listed 11 close mates killed on or neared in the same diary entry. Although the price was high, they played a crucial role in ensuring an Allied victory in North Africa. Victory in North Africa revived Allied morale. Victory at El Alamein was for many the moment that they believed that the war might not be lost. As Winston Churchill said of the Allied achievement, "Now is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." While the Second Battle of El Alamein was a turning point for Allied fortunes, there was still a long war to be fought to defeat Nazism and fascism in Europe. In 1967, on the 25th anniversary of the battle, General Montgomery, or Monty as he was affectionately and respectfully known, paid special tribute to the fallen of the 9th Division when he visited their graves in El Alamein Cemetery. He later told a friend, "The more I think back, the more I realise that the winning was only possibly made by the bravery of the 9th Australian Division in holding the road against counterattacks and slowly pushing forward despite increasing casualties. I do not know of any other Allied division who could have done it." Today we remember El Alamein. We pay our immense respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour, to the men who died at El Alamein in particular, and to the survivors who returned home, and for whom many, their traumas and deep sorrows are known only to them and the families who love them. We remember you today, we remember you every day, with pride and respect. And to the young people again, we do so because we are young and we are free.
Thank you, Director. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision to which we remain true is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations over more than a century. But first we present a lament, flowers of the forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Corporal Richard Alexander Matheson. Richard Matheson was born on the 16th of July 1911 to Thomas and Elizabeth Matheson. Thomas had moved up from Victoria in the 1890s to Tamarumba in the foothills of Snowy Mountains, New South Wales. Thomas married young, but in 1907 his first wife died, leaving him with 4 children under 12. So the following year, Thomas, now in his late 30s, married 22-year-old Elizabeth Porters and began his second family. Richard would be the third of their 6 children. Richard had some schooling in Tamarumba and grew up alongside his brothers and sisters in this beautiful, rugged part of the country. But by his mid-teens, he was working to help support the family. The children's mother, Elizabeth, died from influenza in September 1919, most likely from the deadly Spanish flu that swept across the world after the Great War. For 8-year-old Richard, his siblings, and their father, this must been a devastating blow. Tragedy visited once more in 1928 when Richard's father, Thomas, died after a work accident felling trees. The family moved to Wagga Wagga, and here the young man became a farrier. Richard was 28 years old when the Second World War broke out. Along with his 3 brothers, George, Tom, and William, he enlisted in the AIF in June 1940. He was assigned to the 8th Recruit Battalion in Wagga before being posted to the 3rd Pioneer Battalion, then forming in Sydney. During 1941, the battalion spent time in Cowra and Darwin before returning to Sydney in October. They would be sailing for the Middle East to join the Australian forces. Trained for the dual role of infantry and engineers, the pioneers would be an asset to any commander in the field. Arriving in Egypt in late November, the battalion was the first stationed in Palestine before reassigned to the 9th Division in Syria. By the end of June 1942, an emergency saw the division rush to the front line in Egypt. Rommel's army had broken through and threatened to capture Cairo and Suez Canal. The Australians played an important role in holding the line at El Alamein, and over the next few months, the Allied forces built up their strength and readied the attack to strike back. Although heavy fighting took place, the 3rd Pioneers were in reserve and saw little action. In September, Richard was promoted to Lance Corporal, and the following month made Acting Corporal. In the hot and dusty desert, the men trained relentlessly. The Allied counterattack began on the night of the 23rd of October 1942, but after a week of a grueling battle, there was still no breakthrough. The Australians were forced to keep up pressure and continued attacking. With casualties steadily mounting, the pioneers were called in to fight as infantry. By sunrise, on the 31st of October, the 2 3rd Pioneers, through no fault of their own, were isolated, dangerously exposed, and almost surrounded by German troops. Suffering heavy casualties, they were called upon to surrender. The response showed the pioneers' spirit despite this desperate situation. If you want us, come and get us. And come for them they did. Fighting raged on throughout the blistering heat of the day, and the area was blanketed in dust and smoke. Just as German Panzers appeared late in the afternoon to finish off the Australians, British tankers arrived to defend them. The pioneers hugged the ground as tank battle exploded around them. When the enemy finally driven off, the Australians held the ground, but the cost was high. The 2/3 pioneers suffered 118 casualties that day. Among the dead was Richard Matheson. We don't know at what stage of the battle he died or how, just that he made the ultimate sacrifice in the thick of the battle with his comrades that day. He was buried at Alamein War Cemetery in Egypt. Back home in Australia, his elder sister Amy received the bad news. 1942 was already a bad year for the family. Tom had been taken prisoner in February with the fall of Singapore, and William, the youngest, was missing. Tom would return after the war, but William remained missing, presumed dead. On the anniversary of Richard's death, Amy remembered her brother in the Wagga Daily Advertiser. In loving memory of our dear brother and Uncle Dick. We think of you in silence, and we love to speak your name. In life, we loved you dearly. In death, we do the same. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among nearly 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is displayed this evening beside the pool of reflection. This is one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Corporal Richard Alexander Matheson, who gave his life for our freedoms and in the hope of a better world.
If you're able, I invite you to please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Catapult party present. Arms.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Catapult party outwards! Turn! Catapult party quick! March!
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you. Just before we invite the veterans